Absolutely wonderful to be joining you again this week. Many of you have been sending emails, questions, and we're not going to address all of that today. Safe to say this, keep praying for Ben. Ben, if you've followed it even on our Facebook page, Ben, the left side has started to move, which is brilliant. The neurologist is so pleased, but the family really want us to continue to pray because they believe that prayer is the key and prayer is working. So thank you for that. I don't want to say anything more other than this one thing before we introduce Edwin and ask Edwin a couple of things. Edwin, good to have you.
Nice to have you here, Mark.
Thank you so much for bringing me into your home. We'll be coming to you now and you'll be getting all the time. Just one more thing, folks. We've been asked this morning. I don't want to name a surname, but we really need to pray for a dear lady called Roberta. Please, if you can really pray for Roberta. Roberta desperately needs our prayers, and her family are just devastated and rocked by news that they've received just in the past 2 days. So let's really get praying. So folks, I'm joined by Edwin. We're going to talk about a couple of things, but as you all know, Edwin and I have been on a similar journey in relation to renal cancer or kidney cancer, Edwin. But I wanted to meet Edwin simply because you've been asking some questions, but I want also Edwin to share just a little bit of what you don't see about this man when we watch the news and hear interviews and stuff like that. So Edwin, thank you for bringing me to your home.
You're very welcome.
And I mean that. Edwin, tell us just a little bit what you want to share just about your family background.
Well, I'm one of the very privileged people who was brought up in a Christian home.
Brilliant.
So my father's family would have been a Brethren family, my mother's family would have been a Presbyterian family. And but they were both saved. Dad was saved at 14, Mum was saved as a young person. And we were brought up in a home where God was honoured, where God was respected. And that was a home where we were taught at an early stage, all of us, that we needed personally to put our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. So in spite of the fact that I was brought up by good godly parents, that was never going to save me. It was never going to put me in a circumstance where I was on my way to heaven because I was born to godly parents. That was a personal decision that I had to make, and that was something that I was taught from an early age, and it was something that I carried out at an early age. I knew my need of Christ, and I sought Him, and He saved me, even as a child. And throughout my early childhood, that was all easy. When it came to being a teenager, it just wasn't so easy. And I became very shy about my Christian faith. I was afraid to express my Christian faith. And the consequence of that was that it just didn't develop as a Christian. And it was only whenever I left school and went to agricultural college where I was going into a world as a young man that I had to take a decision there that I was going to try and hide my Christianity or I was going to express my Christianity. And you know what? It's so much easier when you express your Christianity.
Yeah, that's right, Edwin.
And it doesn't hinder your growth as a Christian. But people have respect for those who speak out and tell you that actually I'm not going down to the pub with you because I'm a Christian. And once you got the first few weeks over and people realised that that's what you were, they had respect for you and they got on with you as a person and not as they didn't see you as some sort of pariah because you were a Christian.
Brilliant, Edwin. Take us up to sort of your involvement when you come into the political scene. Can you just paint a little bit of the background in that instance?
Well, I suppose politics was always in this household because my dad was involved in politics from 1969. So he stood for a political office then. And it was with Ian Paisley and it was very much, it would have brought us some problems in that it was outside of the norm at that stage and there's a lot of people didn't like the fact that he was stamped with a rabble rouser that Ian Paisley was perceived to be. But he done it. and he was in elected politics for many years. So I was always brought up with politics. And then in 1976, I was only 11, Dad was shot at by Lion LA coming out of Alms Market in Belfast. And as a young person, I was quite angry and bitter about that. But what I always observed was Dad was around the cattle marts a lot, and sheep sales and all the various things that I met with him. And, he just got on with everybody just the same.
Yeah.
And here was me resenting people because they were Catholics.
Yeah.
And, I slowly realised that this is wrong for me to be bitter against an entire group of people because of the actions of a small number of individuals.
Yeah.
And, again, God taught me that bitterness does no good. And it's something that has helped me through life in many ways, even having that experience, because I've dealt with many people at a constituency level who have been mistreated in some way and haven't got justice and haven't got treated right and hasn't been sorted, and they've allowed it to eat them up.
Yeah.
And you know what? See, bearing grudges about anything, it does the grudge bearer far more harm than the individuals who you're bearing the grudge about.
That's right.
And I have found in life that whenever you get knocked down, the best thing to do is to dust yourself down, get back up and get on with what's in front of you, because this business of going about saying, if only I could do this or if only I could get that boy in, all it'll do is do yourself harm, and you're not doing the other person any harm whatsoever.
That's right, Edwin. That's brilliant, and it's a very biblical principle, isn't it? To turn the other cheek and to have forgiveness, because we've experienced forgiveness with the Lord Jesus Christ.
But it actually does yourself much more good than
absolutely.
And if you're setting out to do harm to other people, the only person you're harming is yourself. In reality, you may end up harming the other people, but you're harming yourself.
That's right, Edwin. Edwin, let's come to just when you received the news in relation to your health.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, because we've got many people that are going through cancer, obviously, that we reach out to. Had you any symptoms leading up to your diagnosis, Edwin? Can you just fill us in a little on that?
I suppose 2020 was a year I'd put on a bit of weight over the previous few years, and the Assembly hadn't been operating right, and we as public representatives were getting a lot of criticism for that, and we're very keen to actually be doing our job in full, and probably a bit of comfort eating and so forth, because you don't like people looking at you as if you're some sort of pariah, and we weren't particularly well perceived by many in the public. So I decided I was going to lose a bit of weight in 2020, and from March right through to Christmas, I'd shifted about a stone and a half, and I was feeling really well.
Yeah.
I was feeling 100%. And I remember being in, the toilet somewhere, and they had up on the wall all the symptoms for men's cancers.
Right.
And I read it while I was using the facility, and this was about a month before all of this, and I walked out and I said to myself, I have none of those symptoms. None.
It's incredible.
And I came home from my office one Friday afternoon, didn't feel quite right, and I wasn't right all that night, and I woke up the next day and I had this pain on my right hand side, and I'd done a bit of work on the farm, and I wasn't feeling up to it, and I come in here and I had a rigor just in this room here about 3:30. I was really shaking with cold and I had to get a hot water bottle and a blanket. And my wife says, you really need to go to the hospital. And blokes being blokes.
Yeah.
And she's a nurse, by the way. So you should always listen to your wife in the first when it comes to these things, the first instance, but especially when they're a nurse, but of course I didn't. So I said, no, I'll take it, say it'll be busy today and all of that nonsense, So I put it off. And took more paracetamol, we got through that evening and got asleep that night, and I woke up the next morning and I just knew this isn't going away and it isn't right. So I rung out of RSGP, get you down to hospital, it sounds like your appendix. So I was down to hospital and I could hardly walk, and a wee bag because I knew I wasn't coming out.
Yeah.
So she had made up a bag. So I crippled into hospital like an octogenarian who's not in great shape, and I got seen relatively quickly, thankfully. Actually, the hospital was very quiet, and Harry went down whenever my wife told me it was very quiet. I told me as well. So it was during the COVID period, and so I was in, and immediately they get onto it, and the scan now. You've got a burst appendix. So obviously I had the appendix on the Friday and the Saturday, and probably burst that time that I had the regular. You've got a burst appendix, you need emergency surgery. So they went about setting up a surgical team, put me on a drip, antibiotics and so forth. And that was about 10:30 in the morning. I had done about 8, but it was about 10:30 whenever they had indicated all of this. So it was actually 9:30 that night before I was taken down to the theatre because they were so busy. And it was around about 9 o'clock, and this nurse comes round and she says, "We've got bad news for you." I thought, "Oh no, this has been cancelled."
Yeah.
She says, "You've got COVID." I says, "To be honest, I couldn't care less about COVID. I'm getting for surgery because I knew this stuff was poisoning me." So that was grand. I went in and got my surgery then about 10 o'clock, and knew nothing about it. Woke up the next morning about 6 o'clock, 6:30, and I was in really good form. Probably a bit of the stuff still in me, the pain relief that I was given. And so I got up, got a tea, bit of toast, and I was in great form. And the doctor called around about 7 o'clock, and I was buzzing. And he says, "Your surgery went very well. You had an abscess there, had developed even in that short space of time with all of the poison." He says, "It took a while, but we've got it all cleaned really well. Very happy with the surgery." Oh, great, happy days. I was actually listening to Getty music at the time.
Very good.
He says, "You need to turn that down."
Yeah.
So I turned it down, and he says, "But we noticed that on the scan you have a growth on your kidney, around 6 centimetres long." And I said, "Okay, does that normally be benign, or would it be cancerous?" And he says, "Well, normally it'd be cancerous." So there's another specialist called round the next day, and he says, "We need to get this out." He says, "We'll have two choices whenever we'll scan it in more detail, to either split the kidney, this is dangerous, or remove it entirely, and we'll make that decision." Yeah. So that was the background to it.
Wow, Edwin. I think it's really, really good to point out, as men, sometimes we're not really good. So I'm a great advocate for speaking out to men in relation to prostate cancer, testicular cancer, because we're not good. We're not good at going to the doctor. So Edwin, did you get a partial nephrectomy, or was your kidney fully removed? What?
Fully removed.
Fully removed.
And the growth was entirely outside it. It was a very unusual form of cancer that I had. So I was sent over to Cambridge for pathology. I am due a scan after 6 months, but the 6 months has come and gone with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
So hopefully in the not too distant future I'll get a scan, but they indicated that it was highly unlikely to come back.
That is brilliant news, Edwin. Edwin, you mentioned through that there that you contracted COVID. So I think it's maybe good just to come to that point, because a lot of folk, and we'll not go into the whole ins and outs here, you can say what you want, but a lot of folk in Northern Ireland, there seems to be a split camp when it comes to this COVID illness. I've had COVID, you've had COVID, so we're very well aware that it's a real virus.
Yeah.
But Edwin, I want to come, I was saying to you off camera, we've got a lovely girl called Gemma McGuire in Oma, and I just want to use this illustration. Gemma is just a wonderful young mother with very young kids, and she's got terminal cancer. And just this week, Edwin, she asked to see her GP. And pretty much, without going into details, she was told absolutely no way. And this was a girl with terminal cancer. So Edwin, how do you view the situation medically? As one of our leaders here in Northern Ireland, how do you see that? Yeah. We're not getting appointments, we're hardly even getting through to speak to our doctors, Edwin.
Yeah.
How do you view that? Or what can we tell the public?
Well, I think you have to put everything into perspective. So over the course of the COVID, there's been, I think, somewhere around 2,000 deaths.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of those people were probably people who were approaching the end of life, and I would suspect that perhaps half of them would have passed away from other causes over the course of the last year. So there's still a significant amount of people have died from COVID.
Yeah.
But if we put it into perspective, say around 1,000 people have died, who may not ordinarily have died from at that point. There's 16,500 people in Northern Ireland die every year.
Yeah.
And there's 4,500 die of cancer every year.
That's right.
So for me, the biggest killer in Northern Ireland isn't COVID, it's cancer.
Yeah.
And for me, that's where the focus should still be.
Brilliant.
So, a lot of clinics have been cancelled. GPs aren't seeing people, and I think it's incredibly important that GPs do see people.
Yeah.
Because our GPs are wonderful people, and they've been trained brilliantly.
Yeah.
And whenever you go in to see a GP and they put their hand on your neck, on their stomach, your back, and they feel around, it's amazing what they can actually detect just by that skill that they have been taught and developed. And therefore, this business of GPs calling people, for me, doesn't cut it. Now, it may be that they're able to do a whole lot of things, and there's times I have run GPs, and being able to give them, a good rundown of what's wrong on the telephone, and it's easy enough for them to make a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But there's an awful lot of occasions where GPs actually need to see people.
Yeah.
And I just think what's happening at the minute is wrong, and GPs need to see people.
Yeah.
And I've had this discussion both with the Chief Medical Officer and the Health Minister and other leaders in health at this moment in time. And I really believe with all my heart that our general practice need to be seeing more people personally, physically. And, I know that there's people there who have marks in their skin and haven't been able to see a GP. And those could be skin,
melanoma or something like that.
Melanoma.
Yeah.
And the person doesn't know, and by the time it's detected, it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
And there's since COVID, there's been around 100 less cancers detected every month. And that's not because there's less cancer, because cancer's growing all the time.
That's right.
So that to me indicates that there's going to be at least 1,200 more cases of cancer detected late. And the consequence of late detection of cancer is early deaths.
That's right.
And I've said it over and over again. I believe that there'll be more people die of late diagnosis of cancer than there will be of early deaths as a result of COVID. So there'll be more deaths from things unrelated to COVID as a consequence of COVID than there will be from COVID. And that's why I think everything has to be done in perspective.
Yeah.
And medically, cancelling, surgeries for pancreatic cancer and things, I just think it's entirely unacceptable.
It's unacceptable, yeah. As you know, Edwin was telling me, I was down in Stormont last week, and just to discuss that with the health executive. I know we're in remote or recess at the moment, but the health executive were meeting that morning. And there's many people, and I shared one story about one gentleman that had been waiting for months just for surgery, and just 2 days before cancelled. So yeah, it is unacceptable, but I want to say this, Edwin, and I think it's important for people to grasp this. Your personal family has been impacted with COVID. So sometimes we look at screens and politicians and we get all these comments, people saying, oh, you're just sitting in Stormont, the house in the hill, and you're not feeling what we're feeling.
Yeah.
But you've shared with me, you haven't seen some of your family.
Yeah, well, first of all, my father died in April 2020.
Yeah.
And he was 90, but he had an ordinary chest infection. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. We didn't see him until the last couple of days. So we were able to get very little sense by the time we did get to see him. So we weren't able to spend, his last days with him in a way that the family should have been able to because of COVID. And we weren't able to have the funeral that the family should have had because he was he was a public figure, he was well known, he was well regarded. There was hundreds and hundreds of people who have said we'd love to be at your father's funeral and we couldn't.
Yeah.
And that irritated me because there's three things which are very important in life: births, deaths, and marriages.
That's right.
And all three of those were severely impacted by COVID. And, that was the first thing. I then had, whenever I was in hospital, I couldn't have anybody come to see me.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, on the Monday, because of how the doctor handled it and that we could remove the kidney and there's a good chance for you and it doesn't appear, I wasn't particularly down about it. But on Tuesday, whenever all of the medication had worn off, and they're only giving me paracetamol at that time, and I had to get the pain relief upped because it was I was in quite a bit of pain. But on Tuesday afternoon, if I was in hospital, I really wanted to see my wife. Really, really wanted to see my wife. And I was actually, I asked one of the nurses, or I actually rang my wife, and I says, "Can you come down and see me?" And she says, "I'm not allowed," and she says, "I'll ring the ward." And I was crying down and go, well, I was in a lot of pain, and the news had actually really come home at that stage that I had cancer. And you can never be sure about things. And she rang the ward, and the ward said, "No, you can't come." So one of the nurses came in to see me, and we got the pain relief up a bit, and I felt a bit better later on. But those were all things which, immediately impacted. And then I got home and then went back in for the further treatment. Again, I couldn't be visited until I got home from that treatment. But I was well prepared in my mind for that. And then, in January this year, I was blessed with having my first grandchild, Isabella, and she's been born in Brazil, and my son's a missionary in Brazil, and his wife's a Brazilian. So obviously there's been quite a lot of COVID in Brazil, and we haven't been able to go out there, and they haven't been able to come home. And then I have another daughter who is a missionary in South Africa, and she had a son in February.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing lots of my grandchildren on WhatsApp and on photographs and so forth. Lots of my grandson in South Africa, less of my granddaughter because they don't have internet where they are in Brazil, unless they're out in the city. So I haven't had the opportunity to see my grandchildren because of COVID, and that is the one thing that I want to do most in life at this moment in time, is just to hold my little grandchildren, to feel them, snuggled up to me, to smell them, to chat to them, to engage with them, to bond with them, and I can't do any of that.
Edwin, you're very honest. We really appreciate you for that. And Edwin, I think some of the folk, we're going to bring this up just briefly or as much as you want, some of the folk were sort of bemused by the whole situation with you potentially going to be our first minister, then you not being our first minister, and some folk, and being honest with you, Edwin, some folk who have been great supporters of the Democratic Unionist Party sort of have been shaken. So do you want to say something just to folk in relation to that? And now Sir Geoffrey is in the mix, and Paul and all of that. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I was never going to be First Minister because I made that choice that I wanted to, do the leadership thing and not do both. And felt that that's where my focus was going to be. I'd never actually planned to do any of that, and I was encouraged by others to put my name forward, and I did pray about it and thought hard about it, and did it. And I don't know, for whatever reason I got it, and for whatever reason then it was removed from me. I don't know, I don't understand it all. I know that some of the older politicians weren't so keen about the idea, but what's happened has happened, and as I say, I don't understand why it happened, but it did, and I have lots to do to get on with. I'm still doing my agricultural ministry and agri-environment minister, and that's something that I enjoyed doing and was going to carry on doing in any event. And for whatever reason, all of this happened, and I just will not dwell on what's in the past, because dwelling in the past is not something which I find beneficial.
Yeah.
You know, looking to the future and trying to know what God's will is for the future is much more important than actually dwelling in the past.
Brilliant, Edwin. Yeah, and there was that confusion, but you've cleared that up. Edwin, there's something else that we received, and we receive a lot of this, okay? And I think recently, and just this morning, I'm sure you've heard the news this morning, there's been another child's death in Dungannon. And were you aware of that? No?
No.
This morning. Yeah, there's been a man arrested. And we've had that in Belfast recently, where the lady, and there's been a man arrested this morning for the death of another little child in Dungannon. But it draws this conflict, Edwin, because we've had some politicians stepping out and saying this is awful, the death of a child, this should not happen. You know where I'm coming here probably. But then on the other hand, them same politicians are coming out and they're promoting abortion. So most of the public, and a lot of us, and especially a lot of us that are Christians, we don't balance that. Because right now, obviously, when we read the scriptures, etc., we know that child death has been right throughout the scriptures from the Old Testament right through. So it's not nothing new. Society thinks abortion is new, Edwin. But really, when we go back to biblical times, children were sacrificed as well. So, Edwin, just as a politician in Northern Ireland, as a believer, I know your viewpoint, obviously, but how does this all balance out? Where we come out and we say, oh, this is so sad, the death of a 1-year-old child, but yet we're murdering loads of other children. How does this balance out?
Well, it's very interesting, because I have a cousin who's just bringing their premature baby home next week, and was born at 26 weeks of age. And that poor wee soul has done remarkably well. And, you know, a few weeks previous, it was entirely legitimate for that wee one to be aborted. And yet they fought to save its life, and it has done extremely well. And God's blessed them. So, you know, we're so thankful for our children. And, you know, as a human being, you know, aside from my salvation and with marriage, you know, the most magnificent thing that has happened is my children being born. And you take that little one in your arms and you hold it, and it's your flesh and blood. That's right. And I don't understand the concept of what's in people's heads about abortion. Yeah. And about this business about it's my body and it's my right, and I appreciate that, and everything else, you know, it is your body and your right to do what you wish to do with it. But there's another little body there, there's no little person there, and they didn't ask to be there. And I don't believe anybody has the right to take that life away. Yeah. And that is a really big issue, and it's a really big problem. And, you know, people talk about clusters of cells, and you know what? They're so wrong. That it is a little human being who's fearfully and wonderfully made. That's right, Emma. And, you know, you look at the scans at that early stage, you'll see the wee hands and everything forming. You know, whenever I was health minister, they actually went through with me how an abortion was carried out, and I'm not going to go into the details because it's awful. Yeah. But I'll say what the first thing is that they will do is that they will inject poison into the heart to stop the heart beating. And if there isn't a beating heart, then, you know, if there's a beating heart there, then there's a person there. It's not a cluster of cells that you're taking out. It's another little human being who has the right to life. And I suppose that's where I come from on it. And I just think it's hugely sad that we now have a society that it's not just acceptable, it's being driven that this is a human right. Sure. How can the taking of life be a human right? And actually it isn't recognised by the conventions on human rights to be a right, but some people claim that it is. And for me it's just, this world that we live in is a world without boundaries. and you go back to the book of Judges, and they talked about every man done that was right in his own eyes, every person doing that which was right in their own eyes, and ultimately, you know, if we go back to the Ten Commandments, you know, you shouldn't kill, you shouldn't be committing adultery, you shouldn't be stealing, you shouldn't be lying, you know, those are basic good tenets for life.
Yeah.
And instead of people doing that what's right in their own eyes, they need to accept that there should be boundaries in life. And boundaries are there for your well-being. So, you know, if you have a fire there and the child's heading for the fire and you stop it going to the fire because it doesn't realise you're putting a boundary on it. You're putting that boundary for its well-being, and sometimes people need to recognise that rules and boundaries and laws are there because they're there to protect yourself from causing yourself harm. So I think the society needs to be a bit more accepting.
Yeah.
That sometimes they need to accept that there needs to be boundaries put there, there needs to be rules, there needs to be laws. And some of the laws that are being passed, I think people need to reassess what they're passing.